My name is Sophia, and I am 28 years old. 3 months ago, I discovered something that shattered everything I believed about family loyalty and unconditional love. The day my parents called me a disgrace compared to my perfect brother Marcus and officially disowned me was supposed to be my rock bottom. But what I uncovered afterward about their precious golden child made their cruel rejection feel like a twisted blessing in disguise. Now sitting in my new apartment, surrounded by evidence that could destroy their perfect family facade, I am holding the power to expose the truth that will flip their entire world upside down. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you are ready to see how karma served my family, the justice they deserved, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this story has more twists than a soap opera, and trust me, you will want to see how this family drama unfolds, until the very end. Growing up, Marcus was everything I could never be in my parents' eyes. While I struggled through community college working 2 jobs to pay for my education, Marcus sailed through his prestigious university on a full academic scholarship. While I dated guys my parents deemed unsuitable, Marcus brought home his picture-perfect girlfriend Sarah from his law program. While I worked as a server at a local diner, Marcus landed his dream job at a top-tier law firm straight out of graduation. The comparisons were constant and brutal. "Why cannot you be more like your brother?" became my mother's favorite refrain during every family dinner. "Marcus would never embarrass us like this," my father would add, whenever I made any decision they disapproved of. When I chose to pursue graphic design, instead of following Marcus into law, they called it a waste of my potential. When I moved in with my boyfriend Jake before marriage, they called it shameful. When I got a tattoo to celebrate landing my first major client, they called it trashy. The final straw came during Marcus's engagement party 6 months ago. I had spent weeks designing beautiful invitations for him and Sarah as a gift, pouring my heart into every detail because despite everything I loved my brother. But when I arrived at the party, my parents introduced me to their friends as their daughter who still hasn't figured out her life yet, while Marcus stood there saying nothing to defend me. That night I overheard them talking to Marcus in the kitchen. "We are so proud of you, son," my mother said. "You have given us everything we ever wanted in a child. If only Sophia could learn from your example instead of constantly disappointing us." My father agreed, adding that they were considering removing me from their will entirely because I had brought nothing but shame to the family name. I confronted them the next morning, demanding to know why nothing I did was ever good enough. That was when they delivered the crushing blow. "Because you are not the child we raised you to be," my mother said coldly. "Marcus represents our values, our hopes, our legacy. You represent everything we tried to prevent our children from becoming." My father went further, stating that until I completely changed who I was and started following Marcus's example in every aspect of my life, they no longer considered me their daughter. They meant it. Within a week, I was blocked on all their social media accounts. My childhood bedroom was converted into my father's home office. Family photos featuring me were quietly removed from the walls. The message was crystal clear. I was dead to them unless I became someone else entirely. But here is where the story gets interesting. About 2 months after my official disownment, I was working late at my graphic design studio when I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah, Marcus's fiancée, appeared at my door looking absolutely devastated. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, her eyes red from crying and her hands shaking as she clutched a manila envelope. "I need to show you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About Marcus. About your parents. About everything they have been hiding from you." She sat down in my office chair and pulled out a stack of documents from the envelope. "I found these in Marcus's apartment when I went to pick up some wedding planning materials. I was not supposed to see them, but now I cannot unsee them." The documents she showed me changed everything. Bank statements showing massive withdrawals from our parents' retirement fund. Forged transcripts from Marcus's university years. credit card bills in our father's name for expenses that made no sense, legal documents that suggested Marcus had been involved in some kind of academic fraud during his law school years, and most shocking of all, a private investigator's report detailing Marcus's secret gambling addiction that had been going on for years. Sarah explained through her tears that she had started noticing strange inconsistencies in Marcus's stories about his success. Phone calls he would take in private, unexplained absences, defensive behavior whenever she asked about his finances. When she tried to combine their bank accounts for wedding planning, he became aggressive and refused. That was when she started paying attention to things that had not made sense before. "Your brother is not who anyone thinks he is," Sarah continued. "The scholarship he supposedly earned, your parents paid his full tuition and forged the scholarship documents to make him look better. The job at the prestigious law firm, your father used his business connections and probably paid someone off to get Marcus hired. Even his grades were not what your parents claimed. I found his real transcripts hidden in his desk drawer. But the gambling addiction was the worst part. Marcus had been stealing money from our parents for years to fund his habit. The retirement money they had been saving for decades was almost completely gone. They knew about it," Sarah revealed, "but they had been covering for him and enabling his behavior because they could not bear to admit their golden child was flawed. They have been so desperate to maintain the illusion of Marcus's perfection that they have sacrificed everything," Sarah said, "including you. They needed someone to blame for the family's problems, someone to contrast against Marcus to make him look better. You became their scapegoat, so they could keep pretending their precious son was everything they wanted him to be." As Sarah laid out all the evidence, everything clicked into place. "The reason my parents had always been so critical of me was not because I was actually disappointing. It was because they needed me to be the failure to justify their continued support of Marcus, despite knowing he was destroying their financial future. Every comparison, every criticism, every moment they made me feel worthless was part of their desperate attempt to maintain their fantasy. The most infuriating part was learning that Marcus knew exactly what was happening. According to Sarah, he had been actively encouraging our parents' treatment of me because it took pressure off him. He would deliberately bring up my failures during family conversations to redirect attention away from his own problems. The brother I had loved and looked up to my entire life had been systematically destroying my relationship with our parents to protect his own image. Sarah begged me not to tell anyone what she had shared because she was afraid of what Marcus might do if he found out she knew. But she felt I deserved to know the truth about why I had been treated so unfairly. "They threw you away to protect a lie," she whispered as she prepared to leave. "And I cannot be part of this family knowing what I know now." After she left, I sat in my studio staring at the evidence until sunrise. Everything I had believed about myself, about my family, about my worth as a person had been based on an elaborate deception. The golden child they had chosen over me was nothing more than a carefully constructed fraud, and they had destroyed their own daughter to maintain that fraud. The first emotion I felt after Sarah's revelation was not anger. It was relief. For the first time in my adult life, I understood that my parents' rejection had nothing to do with my actual worth as a person. Every cruel comparison, every disappointed look, every moment they made me feel like I was not enough had been calculated manipulation designed to protect their precious illusion. But relief quickly gave way to something much colder and more dangerous clarity. I spent the next week meticulously reviewing everything Sarah had shown me, cross-referencing dates and details with my own memories of family events. The pattern became undeniable. Every time Marcus had gotten into serious trouble, suddenly my parents would find new reasons to criticize me. Every time their financial stress increased due to his gambling debts, they would become more demanding about my life choices. I remember when Marcus supposedly got his law firm job. My parents threw a huge celebration dinner and spent the entire evening talking about his bright future while barely acknowledging my presence. What I did not know then was that same week Marcus had maxed out another credit card and needed them to cover his minimum payments. The celebration was not about his success. It was a performance designed to convince themselves their investment in him was worthwhile. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just at Marcus but at my parents for their cowardice. They had chosen to sacrifice one child to save face about the other. They had looked me in the eye and told me I was worthless rather than admit they had failed as parents. They had destroyed my self-esteem and damaged my ability to form healthy relationships because maintaining their fantasy was more important than loving their daughter. But anger without action is just self-destruction, and I had spent enough years destroying myself over their rejection. If they wanted to play family games, I was about to show them I had learned the rules better than they ever imagined. The difference was I was going to play to win. My first step was gathering additional evidence. Sarah had given me a starting point, but I needed more comprehensive proof if I was going to expose the truth effectively. I hired a private investigator named Detective James Rodriguez who specialized in financial fraud cases. I paid him with money from my emergency savings money I had been planning to use for a down payment on a house. But destroying the people who destroyed me seemed like a better investment. Rodriguez was thorough and discreet. Within 3 weeks, he had compiled a devastating portfolio of evidence that went far beyond what Sarah had discovered. Marcus's gambling problem was worse than anyone realized. He had been using our father's business credit lines to cover his debts, putting our father's company at risk of bankruptcy. The forged documents were more extensive than just university transcripts. They included professional references, client testimonials, and even some of his law firm's case files. Most shocking of all, Rodriguez discovered that Marcus had been embezzling money from his law firm's client trust accounts to fund his gambling addiction. This was not just family drama anymore. This was serious criminal activity that could result in decades in prison. The golden child my parents had sacrificed everything to protect was not just a disappointment. He was a felon. But I did not want to simply report Marcus to the authorities and watch him burn. That would be too quick, too clean. My parents needed to understand the full scope of their choices before their world collapsed. They needed to experience the same helpless humiliation they had inflicted on me for years. I developed a 3-phase plan that would systematically dismantle their perfect family facade while giving them opportunities to come clean and make amends. If they chose honesty and accountability, I would handle the situation privately. If they continued lying and manipulation, they would face public consequences that matched their public humiliation of me. Phase 1 involved strategic information sharing. I would let them know I was aware of some problems with Marcus without revealing the full extent of my knowledge. This would give them a chance to be honest with me and potentially repair our relationship while dealing with the Marcus situation responsibly. Phase 2 would escalate the pressure if they chose to continue their deception. I would begin sharing information with key people in their social and professional circles, letting them face the same kind of judgment and criticism they had subjected me to for years. Phase 3 would be complete exposure if they remained unrepentant. All evidence would be turned over to the appropriate authorities, and I would make sure everyone in our community understood exactly how they had treated their children and why. The beautiful thing about this plan was that it put the power entirely in their hands. They could choose honesty and potentially salvage some version of our family relationship, or they could choose continued deception and face the full consequences of their actions. Either way, I would finally know where I stood with them, based on their choices rather than their words. I also started building my own support system during this planning phase. Years of family rejection had left me isolated and uncertain about my own judgment, but now I began reaching out to friends and colleagues who had always treated me with respect and kindness. I reconnected with my college roommate Jennifer, who had always told me my family's treatment of me was unhealthy. I strengthened my relationship with my graphic design mentor Carol, who had been encouraging me to start my own agency. Most importantly, I started therapy with Dr. Amanda Chen, a specialist in family trauma and emotional abuse. Working with her helped me understand that my parents' treatment of me met the clinical definition of emotional abuse and scapegoating. She helped me prepare for the reality that even with all my evidence, my parents might never acknowledge their wrongdoing or apologize for the damage they had caused. The goal is not to make them love you, Doctor, Chen explained during one of our sessions. The goal is to free yourself from needing their love to feel worthy. Whatever happens with your plan, you need to be prepared for the possibility that they will choose their fantasy over reality, even when confronted with undeniable proof. This was the hardest part of my preparation. I had to accept that the parents who had raised me might be so committed to their lies that they would rather lose me forever than admit they had been wrong. But I also had to accept that if that was their choice, it would tell me everything I needed to know about who they really were. As I finalized my plans, I felt something I had never experienced before: complete control over my own story. For the first time in my life, I was not reacting to my family's treatment of me. I was not trying to earn their approval or prove my worth. I was simply going to present them with the truth and let them decide what kind of people they wanted to be. The girl who had been disowned 3 months earlier was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her own value and was ready to demand that others treat her accordingly. I decided to begin phase 1 of my plan during Marcus's birthday dinner, which my parents had planned as another celebration of their perfect son. They had not invited me, of course, but I was not planning to crash their party. Instead, I was going to give them a gift they would never forget: the opportunity to prove they were better people than I suspected they were. 3 days before the dinner, I sent my father a carefully crafted email with the subject line, "Important family information that requires immediate attention." In the message, I explained that I had recently become aware of some concerning financial irregularities that appeared to involve Marcus, and I thought they should know about them before the situation became more serious. I attached just enough documentation to prove I was not bluffing: bank statements showing unusual withdrawals, a single forged transcript, and evidence of one gambling debt, but held back the most damaging evidence. I made it clear that I was reaching out privately because I still cared about the family despite how I had been treated. "I know we have had our differences," I wrote, "but if Marcus is in serious trouble, he needs help, not enablement. I am hoping we can work together to address this situation before it gets worse. I am available to meet this week if you would like to discuss this in person." The response came 6 hours later, and it was not from my father. It was from my mother, and the tone was everything I had expected and worse. "How dare you try to sabotage your brother's birthday with these ridiculous accusations," she wrote. "We will not tolerate you spreading lies about Marcus because you are jealous of his success. If you continue this harassment, we will have no choice but to pursue legal action against you for defamation. Marcus has done nothing wrong, and we will not allow you to destroy his reputation with your bitter fantasies." She ended the email by reiterating that I was not welcome at any family functions and that any further contact would be considered harassment. There was no curiosity about where I had gotten the information, no concern that Marcus might actually be in trouble, no acknowledgement that my outreach had been motivated by concern for the family. Just immediate aggressive defensiveness and threats. I forwarded the email to Dr. Chen, who read it during our next session with a look of professional sympathy. "This confirms what we discussed about their investment in maintaining their denial," she said. "They are so committed to their version of reality that they will attack anyone who threatens it, even their own daughter trying to help them." But I was not surprised by their response. In fact, I had predicted it so accurately that I had already prepared phase 2 before sending the initial email. If they wanted to call me a liar and threaten me with legal action, they were about to learn what real legal trouble looked like. I spent the next week strategically sharing information with key people in their social and professional circles. I started with my father's business partner, Robert Kim, who had always been kind to me and who had a right to know that his company's finances were being compromised by Marcus's gambling debts. Robert's reaction was immediate and serious. Sophia, if even half of what you are telling me is true, we need to bring in forensic accountants immediately, he said during our coffee meeting. Your father's personal guarantee on these credit lines puts our entire business at risk. Why would he do something like this without telling me? I did not answer his question directly, but I provided him with enough documentation to verify the financial irregularities himself. Within 2 days, Robert had hired an independent accounting firm to audit all of their business accounts. When they discovered the unauthorized use of company credit lines, Robert confronted my father immediately. The conversation did not go well. According to Robert, my father tried to dismiss the irregularities as temporary loans that would be repaid soon. When Robert pressed for details, my father became defensive and accused him of listening to lies from his troubled daughter who was trying to cause problems for the family. Robert was not satisfied with these explanations and demanded a full accounting of all personal expenses charged to company accounts. My next stop was Sarah's family. I had stayed in touch with her since our initial meeting, and she had confided that she was planning to break off her engagement to Marcus but was afraid of the social consequences. Her parents, David and Linda Morrison, were prominent members of the same country club as my parents and had been looking forward to the wedding as a major social event. I met with Linda Morrison for lunch and shared enough evidence to help her understand that Marcus was not the man her daughter was planning to marry. Linda was horrified to learn about the gambling addiction and the theft from his law firm, but she was even more disturbed to learn how my parents had been covering for him while scapegoating me. I never understood why your parents were so critical of you, Linda admitted. You have always seemed like such a lovely, accomplished young woman. Now I am starting to understand that they needed you to look bad so Marcus could look good by comparison. That is not how healthy families operate. Linda promised to support Sarah's decision to end the engagement and to help her navigate the social implications of calling off such a high-profile wedding. More importantly, she began quietly sharing concerns about Marcus's character with other families in their social circle, particularly those with daughters who might be targeted by him in the future. The third phase of my information sharing involved Marcus's law firm. This was the most delicate situation because it involved potential criminal charges, but I felt I had a moral obligation to protect his clients from ongoing theft. I scheduled a meeting with the firm's managing partner, Elizabeth Carter, under the pretense of discussing potential graphic design services for their marketing department. During our meeting, I carefully steered the conversation toward the importance of trust and ethics in legal practice, then mentioned that I had concerns about potential misuse of client funds by someone at the firm. I did not name Marcus directly, but I provided enough specific details about the financial irregularities that Carter would be able to identify the source quickly through her own investigation. Carter's expression grew increasingly serious as I spoke. These are very grave allegations, she said. If you have evidence of financial misconduct involving client accounts, we need to address this immediately. Client trust is the foundation of our entire profession. I provided her with copies of the evidence Rodriguez had gathered, making it clear that I was not seeking personal gain but felt obligated to protect innocent clients. Carter thanked me for bringing the situation to her attention and assured me that the firm would investigate immediately and take appropriate action. Within a week of these meetings, my parents' carefully constructed world began showing cracks. Robert suspended my father's access to all business accounts pending the completion of the audit. Sarah officially ended her engagement to Marcus and moved back in with her parents. Marcus's law firm launched a formal investigation into their client accounts and placed him on administrative leave while they conducted their review. But instead of acknowledging that I had been trying to help them, my parents doubled down on their denial and their attacks on me. My mother began calling my clients to complain about my harassment of their family, trying to damage my graphic design business in retaliation for exposing Marcus's problems. My father went even further, hiring a lawyer to send me a cease and desist letter demanding that I stop spreading false information about Marcus. The letter threatened criminal charges for defamation and harassment if I continued my campaign of lies against our family. This was the moment I knew they had made their final choice. Even with their son's crimes being investigated by his law firm, their business partnership in jeopardy, and their retirement savings depleted by his gambling debts, they were more committed to attacking me than addressing the real problems in their family. They had chosen Marcus over truth, fantasy over reality, and cruelty over love. Now they were going to live with the consequences of that choice, and I was going to make sure those consequences were as complete and devastating as the rejection they had inflicted on me. Phase 3 was about to begin, and this time there would be no mercy and no opportunities for redemption. The cease and desist letter was the final straw that convinced me my parents would never choose honesty over protecting their golden child. They had been given multiple opportunities to address the situation privately, to show even minimal concern for the damage Marcus had caused, or to acknowledge that their treatment of me had been unfair. Instead, they had chosen to escalate their attacks and try to destroy my livelihood. Fine. If they wanted to play hardball, I was about to show them what a real power play looked like. I called Detective Rodriguez and authorized him to turn over all of his evidence to the appropriate authorities. Within 48 hours, Marcus was facing criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The district attorney's office was particularly interested in his theft from client trust accounts, which carried mandatory prison time under state law. But criminal charges were just the beginning. I had spent weeks preparing a comprehensive media strategy that would ensure their shame was as public as the humiliation they had inflicted on me for years. I reached out to investigative journalist Michelle Torres at our local newspaper, who specialized in white-collar crime and family corruption stories. Michelle was fascinated by the story, particularly the angle of parents sacrificing one child to enable another's criminal behavior. This is not just about financial fraud, she explained during our interview. This is about family systems that create and enable destructive behavior patterns. Readers need to understand how these dynamics develop and what the consequences look like. The article Michelle published was devastating in its thoroughness. She had independently verified every major claim through public records, court documents, and interviews with multiple sources. The headline read, "Local Family's Golden Child Facade Crumbles as Embezzlement Charges Reveal Years of Deception and Sibling Scapegoating." The article detailed Marcus's criminal charges, the financial damage to our father's business partnership, and the systematic way our parents had covered for his behavior while emotionally abusing me. Michelle had interviewed Dr. Chen about the psychological dynamics of family scapegoating, Robert Kim about the business implications of my father's choices, and even Linda Morrison about the social manipulation they had witnessed. But the most powerful part of the article was Michelle's interview with Sarah about her experience discovering the truth about Marcus and witnessing how our parents had treated me. Sarah's quotes were particularly damaging. They needed Sophia to be the family failure so they could continue pretending Marcus was a success. I watched them systematically tear down their daughter's self-esteem to protect their son's image, even though they knew he was stealing from them. The article went viral in our community within hours of publication. Our parents' country club, friends, church congregation, and professional colleagues all shared and discussed the story. The comment section was filled with people expressing shock at how they had treated me and anger at their enabling of Marcus's criminal behavior. My father's business partnership with Robert Kim was officially dissolved the day after the article published. Robert released a statement explaining that he could not continue working with someone who had compromised their company's integrity and finances to cover for his son's gambling addiction. The country club where my parents had been members for 20 years asked them to resign rather than face an official expulsion hearing. Several of their closest friends publicly distanced themselves from the family, with some even reaching out to me to express their support and apologize for not recognizing the abuse I had endured. Marcus's law firm fired him immediately after the article published, citing the criminal charges and the negative publicity as grounds for termination. They also filed a civil lawsuit against him to recover the money he had stolen from client accounts, effectively guaranteeing he would face financial ruin even if he somehow avoided prison time. But the most satisfying consequence was watching my parents finally face the kind of social judgment and criticism they had subjected me to for years. Suddenly, they were the ones being whispered about at social gatherings. They were the ones whose parenting was being questioned and criticized. They were the ones experiencing shame and rejection from their community. I felt no sympathy for them. They had made their choices with full knowledge of the consequences, and now they were simply experiencing the natural results of their actions. The only difference was that their shame was deserved, unlike the shame they had tried to make me carry for their failures. The final piece of my plan involved ensuring that Marcus faced appropriate consequences for his criminal behavior. I worked closely with the district attorney's office to provide evidence and testimony that would support their prosecution. I also connected them with other victims of Marcus's theft, including several clients whose trust accounts he had raided. Marcus tried to plea bargain, offering to make restitution in exchange for reduced charges, but the evidence was too overwhelming and the publicity too intense for prosecutors to accept a lenient deal. He was ultimately sentenced to 8 years in prison for embezzlement and fraud, with an additional 5 years of probation upon release. During his sentencing hearing, I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched my parents weep as their golden child was led away in handcuffs. Part of me felt sorry for their pain, but a larger part of me felt vindicated. They were finally experiencing consequences for their choices, and Marcus was finally being held accountable for his actions. The judge's comments during sentencing were particularly pointed. The defendant's crimes were enabled by family members who chose to cover for his behavior rather than seek appropriate help. This case should serve as a warning about the consequences of enabling destructive behavior and failing to address serious problems before they escalate. The weeks following Marcus's sentencing were surreal. For the first time in my adult life, I was not defined by my family's disapproval or my brother's supposedly superior accomplishments. The community that had watched my parents publicly criticize and reject me for years was now witnessing the complete collapse of everything they had claimed to represent. My parents' response to their public humiliation was exactly what I expected. They blamed everyone except themselves and Marcus. According to mutual acquaintances who reported back to me, my mother was telling anyone who would listen that I had orchestrated the entire scandal out of jealousy and spite. My father was claiming that Marcus had been framed and that the evidence against him had been fabricated by vindictive business competitors. They were even trying to rewrite the history of my disownment, claiming they had only been trying to help me become more responsible and that I had misunderstood their intentions. Some of their remaining friends apparently bought into these revised narratives, but most people who knew our family recognized the lies for what they were. The financial consequences for my parents were severe and immediate. With Robert Kim ending their business partnership and demanding repayment of all money Marcus had stolen from company accounts, my father faced personal bankruptcy. Their house went into foreclosure when they could not keep up with mortgage payments while simultaneously paying legal fees and restitution. My mother was forced to find employment for the first time in 30 years, taking a part-time retail job that barely covered their basic expenses. The woman who had spent decades judging other people's life choices was now folding clothes at a department store for minimum wage while wearing a name tag that read, "Hello, my name is Patricia." But despite losing their house, their social standing, their business, and their precious son, my parents never once reached out to apologize or acknowledge that they had been wrong about anything. They never expressed concern about the emotional damage they had inflicted on me, or curiosity about how I was rebuilding my life after their rejection. This confirmed everything Dr. Chen had prepared me to expect. Some people are so invested in their version of reality that they would rather lose everything than admit they were wrong, she had explained. Your parents have built their entire identity around being superior to others and having a perfect family. Acknowledging their failures would require dismantling their fundamental sense of self. Meanwhile, my own life was flourishing in ways I had never imagined possible. The graphic design business that my parents had dismissed as worthless was thriving, particularly after the publicity from Michelle's article brought me several high-profile clients who specifically wanted to work with someone who had shown such integrity in difficult circumstances. Jennifer, my college roommate, helped me find a beautiful apartment in a trendy neighborhood where I was surrounded by other creative professionals who appreciated my work and valued my friendship. Carol, my mentor, invited me to join her agency as a partner, recognizing that my experience and skills had grown substantially over the past year. Most importantly, I was building genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. I started dating again, this time with a clear sense of my own worth and firm boundaries about how I expected to be treated. The men I met now were drawn to my confidence and independence rather than intimidated by my success. Dr. Chen and I continued working together, but our sessions had evolved from trauma recovery to personal growth and relationship building. "You have accomplished something remarkable," she told me during one of our meetings. "You have broken a generational cycle of dysfunction and created a new foundation for your life based on your actual values rather than your family's expectations." The validation from my community was overwhelming and healing in ways I had not anticipated. People who had known me for years began sharing stories about how they had always thought my parents' treatment of me was inappropriate, but had not felt comfortable speaking up. Former teachers, neighbors, and family friends reached out to express their support and admiration for my courage in exposing the truth. Sarah and I developed a genuine friendship based on our shared experience of discovering Marcus's true nature. She was attending therapy as well, working through her own trauma from being deceived and manipulated by someone she had trusted completely. Together, we supported each other through the process of rebuilding our lives and learning to trust our instincts again. I keep thinking about all the red flags I ignored because I wanted to believe he was the person he pretended to be. Sarah confided during one of our coffee meetings, "But watching how your parents treated you should have been the biggest red flag of all. Anyone who could be that cruel to their own daughter was never going to treat me with respect either." The legal proceedings continued for months as prosecutors built their case and civil lawsuits worked through the courts. I testified in several proceedings, always with the same message: my goal had never been revenge but justice and accountability. I wanted other families to understand the consequences of enabling destructive behavior and sacrificing one child to protect another. Marcus himself never reached out to apologize or acknowledge the damage his actions had caused to multiple families and businesses. According to his lawyer's statements in court, he maintained that his gambling addiction was a disease and that his family should have been more supportive rather than exposing his problems to outsiders. This attitude confirmed that my parents had raised exactly the kind of person their parenting style was designed to create: someone who believed he was entitled to special treatment and protection from consequences, regardless of how his behavior affected others. The golden child they had sacrificed everything to protect had turned out to be precisely as selfish and destructive as his upbringing had encouraged him to become. As I watched their entire world crumble around them, I felt something unexpected: pity. Not for their suffering, which was self-inflicted, but for their inability to learn from their mistakes or grow from their experiences. They had lost their son, their money, their reputation, and their daughter, but they had not gained any wisdom or self-awareness in the process. They were going to spend the rest of their lives trapped in the same patterns of denial and blame that had created this disaster in the first place. The only difference was that now they had no one left to scapegoat and no golden child left to protect. They were alone with the consequences of their choices, exactly as they had left me alone with the consequences of theirs. 2 years have passed since Marcus was sentenced, and I can honestly say that being disowned by my parents was the best thing that ever happened to me. The family that rejected me as a disgrace has been completely destroyed by the golden child they chose to protect, while I have built a life filled with genuine love, respect, and success. My graphic design agency, which I now run with Carol as my business partner, has become one of the most respected firms in the city. We specialize in working with nonprofits and social justice organizations, helping them tell their stories and reach their communities effectively. The irony is not lost on me that my parents' rejection led me to find my true calling in amplifying the voices of people who have been marginalized and dismissed by others. The apartment Jennifer helped me find has become a gathering place for an amazing group of friends who celebrate each other's successes and support each other through challenges. Last month, I hosted a dinner party where everyone shared stories about overcoming difficult family situations, and I realized that many people carry scars from parents who could not love them unconditionally. My relationship with Jake, my college boyfriend whom my parents had deemed unsuitable, has blossomed into something beautiful and healthy. We rekindled our connection after he reached out following Michelle's article, and this time we are building something based on who we actually are, rather than who our families expected us to be. He proposed last month, and our wedding will be a celebration of chosen family rather than biological obligation. Dr. Chen and I have reduced our sessions to monthly check-ins, but she remains an important part of my support system. She recently told me that my story has become a case study she shares with other clients who are struggling with family scapegoating, showing them that it is possible to break free from toxic dynamics and create a fulfilling life despite parental rejection. You have transformed from a victim of family dysfunction into a survivor who helps others recognize their own worth, she said during our last session. That is not just healing, that is heroic. My parents never recovered from the scandal that destroyed their perfect family facade. They lost their house, their social standing, and most of their friends. My father's attempts to rebuild his business failed repeatedly because potential partners would research his background and discover the story of how he had sacrificed his company's integrity to enable his son's criminal behavior. My mother's retail job became permanent when no other opportunities materialized, and she now works full-time at the same department store where she once shopped as a privileged customer. According to people who still have contact with them, she has become bitter and angry, constantly complaining about how unfairly life has treated her, while never acknowledging her role in creating her circumstances. Marcus was released on parole after serving 6 years of his 8-year sentence, but his prospects for rebuilding his life are limited. His law license was permanently revoked, he owes hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution, and his criminal record makes employment difficult. He moved back in with our parents in their small rental apartment, 3 broken people clinging to each other while refusing to take responsibility for their choices. I learned about Marcus's release through Sarah, who had married a wonderful man named David and started a family of her own. She occasionally updates me on our former family's situation, not because I ask, but because she believes I have a right to know about developments that might affect my safety or peace of mind. They are all still blaming you for everything she told me during our last conversation. Your mother actually told someone at her church that you destroyed the family out of jealousy. It is like they learned nothing from everything that happened. I was not surprised by this information, but I was grateful for my complete emotional detachment from their ongoing dysfunction. The people who had once had the power to devastate me with their criticism and rejection were now irrelevant to my happiness and success. Their continued denial and blame felt like watching strangers struggle with problems that had nothing to do with me. The most healing aspect of my journey has been connecting with other survivors of family scapegoating through support groups and online communities. I have learned that my experience, while painful, was not unique. Many families create golden children and scapegoats, and many parents sacrifice one child's emotional well-being to protect their investment in another child's image. But I have also learned that breaking free from these toxic dynamics is possible, and that the qualities that make someone a family scapegoat often make them resilient, empathetic, and successful in healthy relationships. The independence my parents criticized as selfishness became the foundation for building a business. The emotional sensitivity they dismissed as weakness became my ability to connect with clients and create meaningful work. Last week, I received a message through my business website from a young woman whose situation reminded me of my own. Her parents had disowned her for refusing to cover for her brother's drug addiction, and she was struggling with shame and self-doubt despite knowing she had made the right choice. I met with her for coffee and shared my story, emphasizing that family dysfunction is not a reflection of the scapegoat's worth, but of the family's inability to face reality. By the end of our conversation, she was sitting straighter and speaking more confidently about her decision to prioritize her own well-being over family loyalty. "I cannot believe someone else has been through exactly what I am experiencing," she said. "It makes me feel less crazy and more hopeful about my future." Helping her reminded me that my parents' rejection, while devastating at the time, had ultimately freed me to become the person I was meant to be, rather than the person they wanted me to be. Their love had always been conditional on my willingness to play a role in their dysfunction, which meant it was never really love at all. Real love, I have learned, does not require you to diminish yourself to make others feel better. Real love celebrates your success rather than feeling threatened by it. Real love supports your growth rather than demanding you stay small to protect someone else's ego. As I finish telling this story, I want you to know that if you are dealing with family rejection, financial betrayal, or having to expose difficult truths about people you love, you are not alone in this struggle. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right? How did you handle the situation when standing up for yourself meant losing relationships you thought mattered? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your experiences and insights help create a community where people can support each other through these challenging situations. If this story resonated with you or reminded you that sometimes the family that rejects you is doing you a favor, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming toxic family dynamics and building the life you deserve. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by family approval, and remember that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from people who cannot love you the way you deserve to be loved. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it inspires you to choose your own well-being over toxic family loyalty whenever that choice becomes necessary.